Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, an awful lot happening at this hour in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, made headlines you saw this week by endorsing infanticide on camera. That wasn't a big deal to most people in the national press, but this afternoon, on the first day of Black History Month, a picture surfaced, a yearbook photograph from 1984, of Northam wearing either blackface or a KKK robe in a photograph. That's a problem for Ralph Northam. Trace Gallagher is following every development in this story for us tonight. He brings us the latest. Trace?
And, Tucker, we should note for clarity, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam has now confirmed that he was in the controversial picture in his 1984 medical school yearbook showing someone dressed in a KKK robe and hood and another wearing blackface. Northam did not state which costume he was wearing, but did issue a statement that reads in part, quoting, "I am deeply sorry for the decision I made to appear as I did in this photo and for the hurt that decision caused then and now. This behavior is not Tucker, we should note for I am today and the values I have fought for throughout my career in the military, in medicine, and in public service." The Virginia Republican Party is condemning the picture, saying, quote, "Racism has no place in Virginia. These pictures are wholly inappropriate. If Governor Northam appeared in blackface or dressed in a KKK robe, he should resign immediately." This marks the second time in recent days that Northam has drawn heat from Republicans. He was also called out to explain his support for a failed measure that would have permitted full-term abortions. Listen.
If a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue.
Northam worked as a pediatric neurologist before being elected to the Virginia State Senate back in 2007. It is notable that Northam was also quick to condemn the racial violence that rocked Charlottesville back in August 2017. And Virginia Democrats might be less resistant to fight any potential resignation of Northam because Virginia's Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, is an African-American Democrat. We will come in with breaking news if it happens. Tucker.
And it looks like it might. Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Well, as you just saw on tape, Northam came out in favor of infanticide this week. We're not exaggerating. Northam said it slowly and clearly. You just saw it. Then he reiterated his views just in case he wasn't clear the first time. In a statement today, Northam explained that abortion at any stage is a positive good, and this is worth listening to carefully, because, quote, reproductive freedom leads to economic freedom. In other words, abortion is virtuous because it makes women more efficient employees, better and more dutiful servants of Northam's donors. They can work longer hours without worrying about anybody but their bosses. Northam is in favor of that, so are most prominent Democrats. They're serving their own masters in the private equity class. Well, the press covered all of this, of course, but not in the way you'd imagine. To the reporters at the Washington Post, the real crime here was Republicans complaining about Ralph Northam. Quote, abortion bill draws GOP outrage against Virginia Governor Northam, comma, Democratic legislators. That's an actual headline. Republicans whine too much. Infanticide, not a big deal. And then all of that changed, you heard. On today, the first day of Black History Month, the site called Big League Politics uncovered the photo Trace just told us about. What's so interesting about it is that Ralph Northam spent a lot of his last campaign calling his opponent racist, again and again and again. The closing of that campaign was an unending flurry of ads putting his Republican opponent up against pictures of what happened at Charlottesville, the atrocities at Charlottesville. There was no evidence that his opponent was a racist, but Northam said it a lot. And yet, strikingly, Northam's opponents never took pictures of himself in blackface or in a Klan robe. So there is some irony in this story. As of right now, a number of prominent Democrats, Kamala Harris among them, have called for Northam's resignation over this. But there are many in his party, particularly in Virginia, who are standing by him. Those Democrats personally oppose blackface and Klan robes as a matter of conscience, but they don't want them relegated to some back alley. They want blackface and Klan robes to be safe, legal, and rare, a private matter between a politician and his donors. For now, Governor Northam will be kept comfortable. You can be certain of that. He'll be resuscitated if that's what his party desires. Dave Rubin hosts the Rubin Report on YouTube, and he joins us tonight. Do you find it striking, Dave, that in the very week that these comments come out on camera, where they're really kind of unequivocal. He's saying if a child is born gravely disabled, you have the right to kill the child. And that's sort of dismissed as like something only the crackpots care about. And then a 1984 yearbook photo looks to me like it's going to end his career tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that a politician could have much worse of a week than he is having right at this very moment. You know, Tucker, one of the things that I know you and I disagree on respectfully is I consider myself begrudgingly pro-choice, and I've said that 20 weeks should be the cutoff, and I know that that's not I know that that's an imperfect position. But the left has gone so crazy on abortion, and it was illustrated by what he said this week, that that's making decent liberals have a harder time taking moderate positions. And then when it comes to this photograph, it's like, look, it's only within the last, 2-3 months that we were dealing with high school yearbooks and Brett Kavanaugh, and there was going to be no chance that people on the left were going to be willing to give him a second chance or explain himself or anything else. And it's unclear now whether he's the one that's in blackface or the KKK hood. He didn't even say which one he was. I mean, by the rules that they're establishing, he has to step down. And look, it's awful. Nobody should be doing that kind of stuff. That being said, there is a slight piece of me that just thinks we should caution this idea of mutually assured destruction based on what all of our pasts are. That's not a pass on any specific thing in this or anything else, but we should worry about where that will lead us as a country, as we're all imperfect people. But this is a case where I see no situation where he can't step down. He's from the party that calls all of you guys, the conservatives, racist. Well, how can they possibly defend him right now?
I think that's right. And I have to say, I just keep thinking this. I lived in this country in 1984. I was dating the same girl I'm with right now. It wasn't that long ago. Nobody I knew ever had pictures of Klan robes on their. I mean, I don't want to add to the pile-on, but, like, where was this? That was weird behavior even in 1984, I'm here to tell you.
Look, you're a little older than me. I was only 8 in 1984. I don't remember anyone doing that. But again, look, people do all sorts of weird things. People wear weird, offending Halloween costumes and all that. And I think people have a right to wear and say whatever they want. It doesn't mean you're not going to have some fallout or face the repercussions for that. That's fine. But by the rules we're playing with right now, they cannot let him off the hook. And if they do, it would actually fuel the fire that the really far left progressives are always stoking, which is that the establishment or the main part of the Democrats or whatever it is racist. And then they really have a point. So I think they have to get rid of him. And look, we've got to figure out a way to acknowledge that people change over time. I don't know what his personal beliefs are. And yes, he called his opponent racist, as you pointed out before, and I don't know that there's any evidence of that. And sadly, we live in a time where most of the people who are calling everyone else racists and bigots and homophobes and the rest of it usually are the ones harboring those actual feelings, because I don't see it that much from conservatives these days.
Or from anybody. I don't even know what they're talking about. I agree with you completely. Yeah. Dave Rubin, thank you for that wise analysis. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Chris Hahn is a Democrat. He's a radio host, a frequent guest on this show, a former aide to Senator Chuck Schumer, and joins us tonight. So do you find it a little strange, Chris Hahn, that you can come out in public and say, yeah, it's okay to kill a child who has been born, which is what he said, and then he said it again, and everyone's like, oh, that's not a big deal, infanticide, killing a human being, whatever. Narrow's okay with it. And then on the basis of a yearbook photo, he's probably going to resign, I would assume, by the end of tonight. You think it's kind of strange?
Well, I've discussed the infanticide thing ad nauseum. He was not calling for the killing of babies born alive. He was talking about difficult end-of-life decisions for babies who were born severely disabled and may die unless kept on resuscitation. But let's save that for another day, Tucker. He needs to resign right now. He needs to resign. Fine. He needs to resign right now. He has to go. There is no apology here. Now, look, he may have changed, but serving in public life is a privilege. And it should not be tainted by the stain of such racism.
Look, I'm against racism. I make an argument pretty explicitly against it almost every night on this show, for which I'm often called a racist. Yeah. But I'm totally opposed to racism, and I mean it. I just wonder what the standard is. Keith Ellison was a member of the Nation of Islam who called for a black ethno-state and worshipped Louis Farrakhan as a godlike figure, but that's totally cool because why?
Look, I mean, there are lots of things that need to. I don't know all the details of that, so I don't want to go down that path.
No. He was a member of the Nation of Islam. He called for a black ethno-state, and he was the vice chairman of your party. And nobody said anything about it. I must have mentioned that 30 times in the show. Nobody cared. So I'm just wondering, what is the standard exactly?
You know, look, I think the standard right here is very clear when it comes to Ralph Norton and what he did, and I think he needs to go immediately. And I also think there are lots of people in politics right now, like Steve King in Iowa, who need to go immediately. Because I think that we have too many people that play around with racism in this country and get to stay.
Okay, but what about, I mean, calling for a black ethno-state, and I'm not exaggerating, we've explained it many times in detail on this show. Yeah. Maybe there's an argument in favor of that. I don't know what it would be, but why is that okay? I mean, Steve King, whatever he said, he didn't call for an ethno-state, and Keith Ellison
he called himself a white nationalist. But
no, I don't know that he called it. Whatever. Look, I'm not here to defend Steve King. I'm saying he didn't say that, and Keith Ellison did, and he's the #2 man in your party. So, like, what? I mean, why is that all right? Tell the rest of us what the standard is.
And why is it all right that Steve Scalise said he was David Duke without the baggage, and he's the #2 ranking Republican in the House of Representatives?
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be sorted out, and we need to get to a place where we don't have racism and we don't have people who are stoking racial issues in a bad way in our government.
Well, I agree with that 100%. I agree. People should not be punished or rewarded on the basis of their skin color. That's the definition of racism. And it's not only is it happening, it's expanding in this country, and the left is pushing it.
Yep.
So, and they should be ashamed of that. But let me ask you this.
Well, the right allows him to stick around for a long time.
What about poor Ed Gillespie, who, whatever you think of Gillespie's politics, are actually not my politics, but there's no evidence he's a racist. He's like a very decent man, actually. And this Northam character called him a racist, like, repeatedly, and he's the one in the blackface with the Klan outfit. Like, does someone owe him an apology at some point?
No. Gillespie ran a campaign Gillespie ran a campaign. He ran a campaign that was all about the statue of Robert E. Lee. Now, what does that stand for? Who is that appealing to? That's appealing to. You know who that's appealing to? Can I tell you who that statue appeals to? It appeals to 1984 Ralph Northam and people just like it.
Oh, but hold on. I live here, okay?
Yeah.
Right across the river from Virginia. He did not run a campaign that was, quote, all about a Robert E. Lee statue. There's no evidence he's a racist. I don't think there is a picture of Ed Gillespie in blackface or a Klan hood. I'm just saying, if the guy in the Klan hood is calling you a racist, maybe you deserve an apology. Yeah. That's all I'm saying. Do you think, or no?
I don't think he deserves an apology. I thought his campaign did a lot of race baiting, not just the Robert E. Lee statues,
they were against
but the people in the hoodies coming to get you. It's just, look, it is what it is. That's politics, and that's where he was. That's the campaign. Ed Gillespie, who was not even from Virginia, not even from the South, decided to run because he was appealing to a type of voter that would have been in that picture in 1984.
I mean, I will say his campaign didn't find this picture, but then neither did the Washington Post. And again, the Washington Post is not a serious newspaper. It's a joke. It's
Nor his primary opponents.
Look, I agree. But the Post got, which is this kind of newsletter run by the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, really a shameful publication. But it got pretty forensic with Ed Gillespie, I remember. Quite. They couldn't find a yearbook photo of the guy running for governor. Why do you think that is?
I got to tell you, this is some of the worst opposition research I've ever seen in my life. How none of his primary opponents or his political opponents or the local papers or the national press, for that matter, found this picture is beyond me. This was a hotly contested race. You would think that they would leave no stone unturned. They would have talked to friends from college to find out what happened. Yeah, they did not. This was poor opposition research by everybody involved here, and it's time for him to go. He should resign tonight.
Not even opposition research, just like reporting. It'd be interesting. Maybe we can get the Washington Post guys who were assigned to Ralph Northam on the show to explain how they missed this. The geniuses over there.
I've done operation research in my life, and you know, the first thing you do is try to find pictures of them from when they were in college and try to find. This is not.
The Post was pretty good at that when it came to
him to find out what he was about.
Because they're shills. That's why. It's not a newspaper. It's a newsletter for the Democratic Party, as you well know. Chris Hahn, great to see you. Thank you.
Nice seeing you, Tucker.
Well, across the country, Democrats have been pushing for abortion to the moment of birth. We're not making that up. It's hard to miss. But when the Daily Caller's Henry Rogers asked members of Congress about Governor Northam and his defense of infanticide, they pleaded total ignorance of it. Watch this.
Do you agree with Governor Northam's comments yesterday about long-term abortion?
I have no idea what he said. I have no idea what's happened there.
Do you agree with Governor Northam's late-term abortion comments he made yesterday?
I don't know what he said.
You have no idea what he said?
I don't know.
Senator, did you happen to agree with Governor Northam's comments about abortion, late-term abortion yesterday?
I have not seen anything.
You've not heard about it?
I've been in retreats.
They must have been Zen Buddhist retreats, silent retreats in Big Sur or something. It's unbelievable. Lie. Nancy Pelosi said she had no idea either. Watch this.
Considering the comments from Governor Northam yesterday, how does that make it harder for pro-life Democrats in the party, and does that cause problems at all?
I'm sorry, I just don't know what he said yesterday.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't have internet access. If only Ralph Northam had said that he wanted doctors to wear blackface while committing infanticide, that would have gotten some attention. Abby Johnson is a former Planned Parenthood director. She's now a pro-life activist, and she joins us tonight. Abby, thanks very much for coming on. It's so interesting how an entire party can push a policy position and then refuse to talk about it, much less debate it. Why not just say, yeah, we're for this?
Well, I mean, they're lying. Look, they've all seen the clip.
Yeah.
They all know what he said. But I think even now, pro-choice Democrats are going, is that a little too far? We don't know. Do we support this guy? Do we not? Because it's so extreme. I mean, even pro-choicers on social media are saying, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? So I think even people in their own party they don't even know how to defend this.
It's completely extreme, but it's not necessarily a surprise. I mean, Professor Singer at Princeton, who's a leading ethicist, has been pushing for infanticide for a long time, and he hasn't been drummed out of academia. And some of these bills, the one in New York, pending in Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, I mean, they all sort of say the same thing, which is that viability means nothing at all.
Yeah, and even the one in Vermont is so extreme. I mean, at least in some of these other states, we have the lie of the health of the mother, which basically means anything. But at least you have to give some sort of excuse. But in Vermont, we're talking about elective abortion through the date of birth. So we're talking about if the woman is laboring with her baby and she decides right before the baby is about to come out, you know what, I don't think I want to do this anymore, then the doctor or whoever has the ability to take the life of that baby. And when you look at what Governor Northam said, what does that mean exactly? So the baby is born alive, and then what? The parents get to decide what's going to happen to the baby? So what does that mean? Yeah. Do we starve the baby to death? Do we suffocate the baby? We don't know what that means. And it's insane that a pediatric neurosurgeon is actually championing these sorts of bills.
I guess what bothers me most is that there's no public conversation about this. And I do think, as you just said, that a lot of people who think of themselves as pro-choice and don't want the government to get involved, and I don't agree with that personally, but I understand where they're coming from. I don't think they're bad people. I think this is just so far, too far. I don't think anybody in America supports this stuff, and yet most people don't even know it's happening because there's no conversation about it.
Yeah, and honestly, this is not new. Colorado, there is a doctor in Boulder, Colorado, Dr. Warren Hearn, that has been aborting babies up until the date of birth for any reason for many, many years. It's happening in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's happening in Maryland. This has been happening, but I'm really thankful that now we sort of have a national platform to be talking about these issues, that it is happening. It's not just happening to babies who have terminal illnesses. Late-term abortions are happening on live, healthy, viable babies.
Yeah. Well, I think pro-lifers need to start saying that those babies are here illegally, and then maybe Gavin Newsom will ride to their rescue, chain himself to a Planned Parenthood door or something like that. Probably would. Abby, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Well, as we've been telling you, there's a lot going on in the state of Virginia tonight. The governor there, Ralph Northam, is hanging on, it appears to be, by a thread. Will he resign? We will, of course, be the first to bring it to you if he does during this hour. Also ahead, the president may have to declare a national emergency if he wants to build a border wall. What would that entail? Is there any precedent for it? We've got the facts on it. Stay tuned. Well, the government shutdown has ended for the moment temporarily, but the battle over a border wall continues. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has vowed that she will never fund that wall under any circumstances. The president promises he's going to build one. So that seems to leave the White House with one option: declare a national emergency and order the building of a wall on our southern border. That sounds like a pretty radical solution. But is it? Well, it turns out that national emergencies happen all the time, and somehow very few of them receive any attention at all. In 1976, Congress passed the National Emergencies Act. That law grants the president the power to declare a state of emergency in response to virtually anything if he thinks it's necessary. National emergencies can be renewed annually and routinely are. Congress can only block a state of emergency with a 2/3 vote. So it's a very broad law, and it's been applied a lot. It began in 1979. President Jimmy Carter declared a national emergency to keep Iranian government property from entering the United States. That emergency is still ongoing, despite being older than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example. Since that date, American presidents have declared no fewer than 58 national emergencies, and 31 of them are still ongoing right now. The average state of emergency in this country has lasted for 9.5 years. So what are some of these emergencies? Well, some really were emergencies. September 2001, for example, President Bush announced a state of emergency that gave the White House greater authority to mobilize the military, call out the National Guard, and perform other counter-terrorist actions. That emergency has been dutifully renewed each of the past 18 years. So that was real. We've also had a decade-long national emergency to combat the swine flu. President Trump has declared 3 national emergencies already. Bet you didn't know that. One of them sanctioned those who use social media to influence elections, those dastardly Macedonians. Another national emergency condemned the government of Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega. That was a national emergency. And yet another ongoing national emergency punishes anyone who works to, quote, undermine the sovereignty of Lebanon. Lebanon. You see the point here? In Washington, protecting the sovereignty of a faraway Middle Eastern country that very few Americans will ever go to qualifies as a national emergency. Protecting our own country's sovereignty is, quote, immoral. And we're not overstating that. Just this week, 4 freshman Democrats in the House co-signed a letter demanding lower funding for America's border enforcement. In other words, it is virtuous to protect others. It is wrong to protect ourselves and our own children. What's the name for that attitude? Well, self-hatred would be one. Should people who hate the country be in charge of it? Douglas McGregor is a retired U.S. Army colonel who has worked to defend the country, author of the book Margin of Victory. He joins us tonight. Colonel, thank you very much for coming on.
Good.
Do you think it's wise for the president to declare a national emergency to secure the border?
Yeah, absolutely, without question. I mean, if you've got 30 million illegal residents inside your country who violated your borders, disregarded the rule of law, you've got a national emergency. We've had this for many years, so that's absolutely the case. Secondly, only the president can address this. He has the constitutional authority to do so. What he needs is an executive order modeled on what I have written and I think is now widely appreciated inside the Fox News community, that effectively says, look, Secretary of the Army, your mission is to secure the border. You've got 30 days. Use whatever forces you need. We'll write up the rules of engagement. We'll provide you with whatever funding is necessary, but you will secure the border. Now, while the Army does that, we can proceed with building barriers. We also have an organization called the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they can be tasked to build barriers. All of the funds necessary to do this can be released.
Control.
Well, they have flood control missions and all sorts of missions inside the United States, but the point is you have Army forces that are engineers, brigades of engineers that can be put to work on the border and build barriers. He doesn't need special permission. He has the constitutional authority to act as the commander-in-chief. He doesn't need any help from Congress at all. And so this is a national emergency. Let there be no doubt about it.
You're confusing me because I live here, and it was my understanding that the point of the U.S. Armed Forces was to guarantee the sovereignty of countries we'll never visit and can't spell. That's not the case. The sovereignty of Lebanon, for example.
Yeah, well, look, here's good news. We have thousands of soldiers, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, who have guarded and secured other people's borders. So they know exactly how to do this. All we're trying to do is defend our own borders. And when you defend it, you defend it. Someone tries to cross your border illegally, you stop them. Once you stop them, you can biometrically tag them, so you have them in a database, and you turn them around and send them back. And you tell them, if you come back again, you will face prison time. You will be prosecuted for violating our laws. That's how you expel people. You don't just leave your borders open and say, here's a camp, move into it while we decide what to do with you. The president can outline these legal restrictions in an executive border order, and he needs to do it as soon as possible.
So this would not be the first time that the U.S. military has secured the American borders. I mean, that's why we have a military. Actually.
Yeah, the Army was there from 1846 to 1946.
Exactly. So why are White House lawyers telling the president that he does not have the authority to do this?
Oh, that's an easy answer. Because the president has surrounded himself for the last 2 years with people who are there to subvert him, to obstruct his agenda. Everyone is there to tell him no. And that's not an answer that he should accept. He has the authority. He needs to act. I was glad to see that he took the Secretary of the Army with him to visit the border when he went down to Texas. I hope the Secretary of the Army is thinking about this, because that's his job.
Does the Secretary of the Army have constitutional authority to make policy?
No, but he has a constitutional obligation and mission to defend the borders of the United States.
Right. Colonel Douglas McGregor, thank you very much for that. Interesting. Well, the president spent the last week defending the government's power to have an armed squad seize you in the dead of night for the crime of alleged perjury. Roger Stone is the man who was seized in Fort Lauderdale barefoot, and he joins us to respond to the media glee in the face of his arrest. That's after the break. Around the people who arrested him and around a very specific interpretation of events. It was completely justified, they say, for the FBI to show up with enough armed agents to overthrow a Central American country. And if Stone says he was upset by all that, well, he must be lying.
FBI had information that he might try to destroy evidence, so they went in, I think, with an appropriate level of apprehension.
They had every reason to believe he was going to destroy evidence. He had threatened witnesses, or a witness at least, and he was playing hardball back.
How does this differ from other people surrounding a house for a raid from the FBI? I don't think it's that different. By the way, the guy spent the entire day in front of news cameras. Clearly, he was traumatized.
Who would put that mud guy on TV? I mean, it's really just a disgrace, I would say. The former CIA director, John Brennan, speaking of disgrace, insinuated that Stone was Hannibal Lecter's long-lost cousin. Watch this.
What happened with Roger Stone was in keeping with the standard operating procedures of the FBI. They were conducting an arrest and executing a search warrant. And let's not forget, Roger Stone has a fair amount of sort of unstable activities and comments that he had made. Stealing someone's dog, telling somebody, Randy Credico, prepare to die. This is not somebody that you want to trifle with.
You don't trifle with him. Now, Brennan, the guy you just saw talking, once lied to the public, you, me, and the rest of us, about killing civilians with drone bombs. But that's not a big deal, really. He's still got a cable contract. So what does Roger Stone have to say about the coverage of his arrest? Well, we're going to ask him. He is on the set tonight. Roger Stone, thank you for joining us. Aren't you under a gag order?
No, actually, the judge said today that she's considering one. She asked for the government and for my attorneys to submit their thoughts about that. I'm going to refrain from speaking about the specifics of the indictment because I think I have addressed it to the extent that I'm going to. But I'm very interested in what's happened here because one of my neighbors has now signed a sworn affidavit who was out walking their dog. And the CNN crew, their truck, showed up roughly a half an hour, 35 minutes before the FBI. I live on a dead-end street. The street was sealed, but they were allowed to stay in position right in front of my house. Now, if I was dangerous, which is the premise of this raid, why were they allowed to stay within the danger zone? Why were they put in harm's way? The idea that I'm a flight risk is ridiculous. I don't have a valid passport. Although I support the Second Amendment, I don't own a gun. There were no firearms in the house. And I've been under investigation for 2 years. So what information did the FBI have that I would destroy evidence? Why would I wait till
Well, I don't know.
Friday?
John Brennan, who is a liar.
John Brennan, who
But he
did
says
perjure.
you're a dog kidnapper.
Well, look, again, that's in the indictment, and I will address it at an appropriate time because it's not true. But first of all, I've written extensively on animal welfare rights for the Daily Caller and have worked very hard to stop the government from conducting inhumane scientific experiments on dogs and cats. But
I mean, you're a dog lover of the first water.
But more importantly, John Brennan perjured himself twice before the Congress, once regarding the role of the Steele dossier and the FISA warrants, and secondarily regarding his breaking into the computers of a Senate committee looking into illegal torture by the CIA.
Yeah, just lying about killing people with drones. Not a big deal,
But
okay?
he's not being prosecuted, like Mr. Comey, Mr. McCabe, Rod Rosenstein, Mr. Wray, General Clapper, of course, who said that, well, no, there's no metadata collection process. And then, of course, Hillary Clinton herself.
So can I get
all those people have perjured themselves, but I'm being prosecuted for perjury.
Well, they never gave the finger to the man, though, and that may be your main crime, in my view. So, but let me ask you about the day of the arrest.
Yes.
So that was, I guess, a week ago today. You said that CNN remained within the security perimeter.
Yes.
During a raid that clearly they must have considered dangerous because they had automatic weapons. At least one arresting officer had 2 rifles with him and a sidearm. It's a lot of guns. How do you think CNN was allowed to stay there? How does that make sense?
I don't know, and I hope Senator Lindsey Graham and the House Republicans will get to the bottom of that, because I'd like to know who signed off on this raid. I mean, look, the main reason that the gag order concerns me is they have unlimited taxpayer dollars, 3 platoons of Ivy League left-wing lawyers to prosecute me. They have just given us an enormous amount of material in discovery that we have to go through, 3 terabytes, according to their press release. Unless people can go to stonedefensefund.com, and unless I have a forum to promote it, I can't possibly raise enough money. So I don't understand,
on what grounds could they just end your First Amendment rights?
Well, they, as you know, they gagged Paul Manafort in his trial because I would be prejudicing witnesses. Pardon me, I'd be prejudicing a jury. Well, that was the whole purpose of this raid, was to poison a jury, to hold me up as public enemy number 1.
To use a cable news channel as a PR operation to get their message out. So if they gag you and take your First Amendment rights away, does that mean that they're no longer allowed to leak to CNN against you?
Well, it's an interesting question. But the whole purpose of the gag would be so I don't poison a potential jury pool. But they've just poisoned a potential jury pool by making me look like El Chapo or Pablo Escobar.
But so it just seems a little bit one-sided. So they can arrest you with overwhelming force and automatic weapons and armored vehicles and stun grenades. And then they can force you not to speak in public, but they can still say whatever they want about you to news organizations
and leak. I mean, 2 years of leaks, as you know, that I was going to be arrested every other Tuesday, has destroyed my business. The censorship of my show on InfoWars and the censorship of my Facebook page has hurt my book sales dramatically. I'm a New York Times best-selling author. So this is part of the plan, destroy you financially. So like General Flynn, you have to plead guilty to something you didn't do.
Unbelievable. Well, you're always welcome on this show, gag order or not. Roger Stone, thank you very much. Michael Caputo is a former advisor to the Trump campaign who spent a lot of time around the Mueller investigation, and he joins us tonight. What is, Michael Caputo, the right course for someone under a gag order? I mean, it does seem a little strange that in a country that, at least the one I grew up in, we bragged about our right to say what we thought is true. What happens if you violate that and say, I have a First Amendment right to speak and I'm going to?
And also, by the way, if you're Roger Stone, and that's the way you make your living in the media, speaking about current events, speaking about the investigations, and you put a gag order on a guy, that's like telling, Robert Mueller he's not allowed to investigate anymore. I mean, you're going to cut back his ability to even make enough money to pay his bills, let alone pay his legal bills. This is a bit different than Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was not a media commentator. Paul Manafort was a political consultant. Giving him a gag order didn't really affect his ability to make a living. Roger Stone's already broke because of this investigation. They've killed his ability to make a living as a consultant. All he's got is his media commentary. And now they're going to cut that back too?
Well, so, I mean, it just seems like fairness is the baseline that everybody wants or should want. So if you're telling a man you're no longer protected by the Bill of Rights and you're not allowed to speak in public, and if you do, you're going to go to jail, then shouldn't anyone in the Mueller office who leaks to the press about Stone go to jail?
No doubt. And I think as well, let's not forget the profligate leakers at the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and others that are leaking right and left every day, all day long. I mean, parts of Roger Stone's testimony before the House were leaked. We know where those leaks are coming from. The great thing about this case, I mean, I hate to see one of my best friends in front of a court and dragging these things out. Probably has to raise $50,000, $60,000 a month to even keep up with the legal bills. But the one thing we get to see is Chairman Schiff, Representative Swalwell, and the others who were most likely leaking this information to the media get to be brought in front of the jury in this case and cross-examined. But I'll tell you this. You know, Roger Stone's one of my best friends, perhaps my best friend. I was his driver 30 years ago, Tucker. I've talked to him not every day, but certainly every other day, frequently for 35 years. I haven't been able to speak with him since the moment of his arrest. You know, Roger Stone's attorneys are taking a real hard look at what the judge is going to be upset about. They're in an abundance of caution. None of us who are close to Roger are speaking to him right now.
Be careful. Mike Caputo, thank you very much.
Yeah, no kidding.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
We've got a Fox News alert for you. Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia has just released a video statement on Twitter. In the video, the governor makes it clear he will not resign from his office, as a number of prominent Democrats have called on him to do, and is determined to serve out the full 4-year term. As we said, many on Twitter have said he should resign immediately over the newly released yearbook photo in which he is either dressed in blackface or a Klan hood. This is the candidate who called his opponent in last year's race a racist. Elizabeth Warren now apologizing to the Cherokee tribe for taking a DNA test. The latest sign that identity politics is the politics of the moment. Is that good for the country? After the break, we will explain.
Right. They have unlimited taxpayer dollars, 3 platoons of Ivy League left-wing lawyers to prosecute me. They have just given us an enormous amount of material in discovery that we have to go through, 3 terabytes, according to their press release. Unless people can go to stonedefensefund.com, and unless I have a forum to promote it, I can't possibly raise enough money. So I don't understand,
on what grounds could they just end your First Amendment rights?
Well, they, as you know, they gagged Paul Manafort in his trial because I would be prejudicing witnesses. Pardon me, I'd be prejudicing a jury. Well, that was the whole purpose of this raid, was to poison a jury, to hold me up as public enemy number 1.
To use a cable news channel as a PR operation to get their message out. So if they gag you and take your First Amendment rights away, does that mean that they're no longer allowed to leak to CNN against you?
Well, it's an interesting question. But the whole purpose of the gag would be so I don't poison a potential jury pool. But they've just poisoned a potential jury pool by making me look like El Chapo or Pablo Escobar.
But so it just seems a little bit one-sided. So they can arrest you with overwhelming force and automatic weapons and armored vehicles and stun grenades. And then they can force you not to speak in public, but they can still say whatever they want about you to news organizations
and leak. I mean, 2 years of leaks, as you know, that I was going to be arrested every other Tuesday, has destroyed my business. The censorship of my show on InfoWars and the censorship of my Facebook page has hurt my book sales dramatically. I'm a New York Times best-selling author. So this is part of the plan, destroy you financially. So like General Flynn, you have to plead guilty to something you didn't do.
Unbelievable. Well, you're always welcome on this show, gag order or not. Roger Stone, thank you very much. Michael Caputo is a former advisor to the Trump campaign who spent a lot of time around the Mueller investigation, and he joins us tonight. What is, Michael Caputo, the right course for someone under a gag order? I mean, it does seem a little strange that in a country that, you know, at least the one I grew up in, we bragged about our right to say what we thought is true. What happens if you violate that and say, I have a First Amendment right to speak and I'm going to?
And also, by the way, if you're Roger Stone, and that's the way you make your living in the media, speaking about current events, speaking about the investigations, and you put a gag order on a guy, that's like telling, Robert Mueller he's not allowed to investigate anymore. I mean, you're going to cut back his ability to even make enough money to pay his bills, let alone pay his legal bills. This is a bit different than Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was not a media commentator. Paul Manafort was a political consultant. And giving him a gag order didn't really affect his ability to make a living. Roger Stone's already broke because of this investigation. They've killed his ability to make a living as a consultant. All he's got is his media commentary. And now they're going to cut that back too?
Well, so, I mean, it just seems like fairness is the baseline that everybody wants or should want. So if you're telling a man you're no longer protected by the Bill of Rights and you're not allowed to speak in public, and if you do, you're going to go to jail, then shouldn't anyone in the Mueller office who leaks to the press about Stone go to jail?
No doubt. And I think as well, let's not forget the profligate leakers at the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and others that are leaking right and left every day, all day long. I mean, parts of Roger Stone's testimony before the House were leaked. We know where those leaks are coming from. The great thing about this case, I mean, I hate to see one of my best friends in front of a court and dragging these things out, probably has to raise $50,000, $60,000 a month to even keep up with the legal bills. But the one thing we get to see is Chairman Schiff, Representative Swalwell, and the others who were most likely leaking this information to the media get to be brought in front of the jury in this case and cross-examined. But I'll tell you this. Roger Stone's one of my best friends, perhaps my best friend. I was his driver 30 years ago, Tucker. I've talked to him not every day, but certainly every other day, frequently for 35 years. I haven't been able to speak with him since the moment of his arrest. You know, Roger Stone's attorneys are taking a real hard look at what the judge is going to be upset about. They're in an abundance of caution. None of us who are close to Roger are speaking to him right now.
Be careful. Mike Caputo, thank you very much.
Yeah, no kidding.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
We've got a Fox News alert for you. Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia has just released a video statement on Twitter. In the video, the governor makes it clear he will not resign from his office, as a number of prominent Democrats have called on him to do, and is determined to serve out the full 4-year term. As we said, many on Twitter have said he should resign immediately over the newly released yearbook photo in which he is either dressed in blackface or a Klan hood. This is the candidate who called his opponent in last year's race a racist. Elizabeth Warren now apologizing to the Cherokee tribe for taking a DNA test. The latest sign that identity politics is the politics